All right, everyone. Welcome in UGA Football Live with JC Shelton. Instant reacts. We do it each week. We do it every game. We've done it every game this season. Let's talk about your Georgia Bulldog SEC champions. What an incredible game. Absolutely. Dude, when this game went into overtime, it was just like a deja vu moment from last week. Obviously, the 8 overtime game against Georgia Tech. It felt like this could even go longer based on how these two teams were playing. Just a defensive slug it out battle. And I think we have to start with the obvious, and this is the quarterback situation for the Georgia Bulldogs. I think a statue is being made right now from Rabun County's own Gunnar Stockton in Athens as we speak. The grit, the toughness, the confidence that he came into that second half with Georgia down 3 points. What was it, 54 yards of total offense in the first half against a really, really good defense. Absolutely props to Texas. They have a really good defense, and they played really well today. You're facing all that adversity if you're Gunnar Stockton. Kirby Smart said he didn't say a word to the kid. And this was his first appearance without Georgia holding at least a 21-point lead in his career. Okay? So, yeah, he's played, but he hasn't played meaningful snaps. It's Carson Beck's team last 2 years. Carson Beck has done a good job of staying unhurt for 2 seasons. And he comes in and listen, I heard Kurt Herbstreit said he provided a spark. I think on one hand, yes. But his confidence and poise, I think, were the key for me because the offensive line saw that, receivers saw that, the entire team saw that, how poised he was. And I think that allowed them to play at their best because that offensive line played much better in the second half. I tweeted it. You can look me up. I tweeted, be fully prepared for this Georgia second half team to try it out and look like the best football team in America. And they were better in the second half again. Right? I was not surprised by the early drops. I was not surprised by this game in the first half. If you listen to our previews this week, I thought it would be a slug it out first half. 10-7 was my prediction. It was 6-3. We had missed field goals from Texas. Red zone opportunities for Texas were not good in this game. Right? And I expected like a 24-21 type of game. It was going to be whoever had the ball last, whoever make plays. And having Gunnar Stockton in there so poised and leading that scoring drive, that first touchdown, Georgia had more yards on that drive to start the second half than they did in the entire first half. And the offensive line was playing better. Lawson Lucky, an acrobatic, amazing catch for a first down that set up that Georgia touchdown to Trevor Etienne. Guys were making plays, right? It's like backs against the wall. I guess I'm going to catch the ball now. The drops are just, nobody knows why. It's absolutely weird to see. You don't see that a lot in football. But you cleaned it up in the second half. And that support around Gunnar Stockton is what won this game. I'm so proud of him for his poise. Highly recruited guy, set records for Rabun County. Hadn't got his chance. He stayed. He could have went to the portal. And now he's getting interviewed as the savior. An SEC championship saver. And I just love those stories. Absolutely. So flowers to Gunnar Stockton. Absolutely. Carson Beck, we'll have to see what that elbow's like. He had to come in for Gunnar Stockton in overtime there. Obviously handed the ball out there to ETN and he gets the touchdown, but he had to come in for Gunnar Stockton because Gunnar got his helmet knocked off. And you could see Carson Beck's elbow just kind of like flapping in the wind. It's not fun to speculate on injuries. That does not look good, obviously. I think if it was more serious, he would have been in some type of air cast or something like that, or already been at the hospital. So hopefully it's something that Georgia can get worked out right before you play in the playoff. And luckily you get that first round bye. And that's huge for Carson Beck now with that injury. That's his throwing shoulder. That is obviously Georgia was very limited from a play calling perspective. They did not want to be aggressive. I think that first drive that Gunnar Stockton engineered, he had his most freedom of the game on that drive. They really kept him bottled up. They were like, all right, man, we're going to use your legs. We're going to give you 1 read beaters. We're going to give you some short passes. Try to at least stretch Texas sideline to sideline, keep them honest in that way. The run game was absolutely huge in the second half, and we'll get into that in a second. But sticking with Gunnar Stockton, he makes the only mistake you couldn't make. After Georgia gets the interception by Dalen Everett, another one. That's 3 interceptions for him in 2 games against Texas. It was number 1 and number 2 at the time. You set up in a really good spot, right? You're in their territory. You're probably going to end it with a kick or so based on, it was hard to find the end zone in this game for both teams. And you make the only mistake you couldn't. I'm sure he wants that one back, obviously, but he responded. And Georgia responded by putting a little bit of trust in him as well. That run, that hit he took, man, I was really scared for him in overtime. You can't go high like that as a defender. I think it only ends up bad. You're either going to get for targeting or you just look like a dirty player. That was one of those things where Gunnar Stockton didn't lower his head all that much, if any. I'm just trying to remember it in my head. And he still goes high. I didn't like that at all. I think it could have been called for targeting. Wouldn't have been surprised, but they end up overturning it. He bounced right back up, though. That's what stuck in my mind, was seeing him dazed. You could see it in his eyes, right? He was dazed. He's probably got a mild concussion, and I'm speculating here, so don't quote me on that. But he got up a little wobbly, but he got straight up and went off to the sideline. That's a toughness, man. That's some Georgia toughness, and I'm sure Bulldogs fans love to see that, just like I did. But we'll continue giving our props here. The fake punt, just an absolute gutsy move by Kirby Smart. Georgia fans know plenty about fake punts. We don't like fake punts. We don't like fake punts. Fake punts, they have some type of curse associated with them, dating back to the Justin Fields in Georgia uniform days. But this one was perfectly timed, perfectly executed. Props to Drew Bobo. Hands, baby. Offensive lineman got some paws. All right, stick him at tight end. I need to see him. I need to see him run some routes. It's a big man. He's got some hands. Perfect pitch to Arian Smith, who gets the first down. And that really, 15 plays on that drive, took all that clock out. And that's what Georgia needed. You didn't have much offense. Your defense, that Texas offense can score on any play, right? They have the players to do it. And if Quinn Ewers had time, when he did have time, he was good. Right? Receivers are making plays. He's making plays. Good balls from him. They get that touchdown on the slant. What does that tell you? That tells me at any time, based on how Georgia's coverage, that secondary plays where very hot and cold, they don't get much pressure. Georgia can get caught. And they did get caught several times in this game. Eyes in the backfield. Malachi Starks didn't play his best in coverage. Dalen Everett got beat on the PI one. I'm glad he ended up getting a PI there because that looked like it could have been a touchdown. And in college, I'm taking that 15 yards every time. But, great game overall for him with 2 picks. But that Texas offense could have scored any time. So I think that fake punt and that long drive, which took basically 10 minutes off the clock, was absolutely huge. In a game like this, there's little things, right? Those little things between 2 elite teams. And I do think Texas is an elite team. I don't think anybody else but Georgia could have done what they did to Texas today. And another surprising thing for me, I don't know if you guys think this. I'd be curious to hear you guys on this. But, Georgia's defensive front, all the talent, Mikael Williams, Warren Brinson, Jalen Walker off the edge sometimes when he does play the edge. Chaz Chambliss has had a good year. Nazir Stackhouse, Tyrone Ingram Dawkins. Those guys, the talent is there. We've seen them play so well, right? It's been hot and cold too. That front did not look like that against Florida. Didn't look like that against Mississippi State. Didn't look like that against UMass. Didn't look like that against Tech. 260 yards on the ground for Tech last week. And that's why you heard this. It was really, national media, they're picking Texas, It was a lot of Texas was a 2.5-point favorite for basically a home game for Georgia. Neutral. No, not neutral. That was a Georgia stadium tonight. And the national narrative was, again, I'm going with Texas. So that first game was a fluke, right? They got dominated, but, they didn't capitalize on mistakes. They made some mistakes of their own. It's a weird game in Austin, right? And I didn't think Georgia was going to dominate Texas today. And I said that. I was like, Dominated the first game doesn't mean you're going to dominate them the second game, right? Hard to beat the same team twice, all that good. Yada, yada, yada. We heard it all. They're still picking Texas, right? Because of the hot and coldness of Georgia. And what happened last week? You allowed 260 yards rushing on the ground. We talked about it in our previews. Hey, this Texas team is kind of morphed into a really, really physical run game team with Wisner, who's come on strong. 33 carries last week against A&M, 186 yards, 3 touchdowns, I believe, as well. Rushed for over 200 yards against A&M and a really good defensive front. And that was my key. It was like, if Georgia can stop the run, they're going to have a really good chance of winning this game. And boy, did they. And it's so surprising that one of the top offensive lines in the nation has gotten physically outmatched by Georgia 2 times in a row. So now it's not a fluke. It happens 2 times in a row. That's set in stone. Texas just could not block Georgia individually. Let's get into it. So this is, even though, we'll start it with this. Net total yards, right? 389 for Texas, 277 for Georgia. Net rushing yards, 141 for Georgia. Texas, 31. 31. Now, you obviously had a chance to win it there, and one play goes a different direction, and we could be talking about Georgia losing this game. But traditionally, you win the rushing battle in the SEC championship, you win the game. Alabama did that last year, right? 141 to 31. Georgia controlled that game in the second half with the ground game. Took a bit. I didn't think it was going to hit early too. Remember? Thought it was going to be a 10-7 game in the first half. Sometimes we're loud wrong on this show. We were not loud wrong this week. I thought Georgia had the guys to do it. I was like, is it a fluke that Georgia had 7 sacks last week not last week, 7 sacks against Texas and Austin and 10 tackles for loss? Was it a fluke? I'm like, no, I don't think so. I think Georgia knows they need to stop the run. And when they know they need to, they do it. 15 tackles for loss for Georgia tonight. 6 sacks. 2 QB hurries. Sack yards, 27. You get 2 picks. I think that just shows us that, who can match up with Georgia right now? Who can match up with Georgia on the defensive front right now? I don't see a team out there who can do it. If it was anybody to be Texas, one of the most experienced offensive lines in the country, I get they were missing Banks. But they had Banks in Austin, and it was the same game. So you cannot tell me if they had him one spot on a 5-man line, you can't tell me with him in there this would be much different. Maybe you take off a sack. It was just impressive to me from that. Now, this raises the question too, for me, is Georgia going to run into a situation where they have to play Gunnar Stockton in the playoff, depending on the injury, which we probably won't know for a couple days, I would assume, until he gets some testing. Are they going to run into a situation where they have to start Gunnar Stockton and their offensive game plan is obviously going to be much different? If tonight was any indicator, Georgia's going to be very limited on offense. They're going to have to use his legs. Obviously, we saw what happened there. I know it was a vicious hit at the end, but he ended up getting the first down, of course, hopped up. Just a fantastic play. It was a QB draw, which worked twice for Georgia. Smart. When I saw him go empty, I was like, this has to be a QB draw, right? Because he threw that interception. He gets pressured. He might just throw it up, and ended up QB draw. I think it was a perfect call. But you saw what he could do with his legs there, and that takes away a defender. So I'm just really hoping if Gunnar Stockton has to start the playoff, that Mike Bobo and company will trust his legs, and they're going to have to focus on the run game, of course. Maybe take your shots here and there, but it's going to have to be like one read beaters, because there's a couple times where Gunnar Stockton missed touchdowns. Oscar Delp wide open on a post route. Again, Oscar Delp open on a little wheel, and Gunnar just didn't see him. Right. I think that shows you that's where his limitations lie, is reading post snap reading coverages, getting his best option. So you expect a heavy dose of that run game. And I think having Trevor Etienne back obviously pays some dividends today. He's just such a smart player. He's just smart. He gets yards after contacts, plays are bottled up, and he usually finds a way to get out of there. impressed with him today. I think him and Nate Frazier, that 1-2 punch, because when Nate gets in there, man, he looks like he has fresh legs, A couple times he looks like the fastest player on the field with the ball in his hands. Etienne having 16 for 94, 2 touchdowns, 5.9 average. Nate Frazier, 6 for 47, 7.8 average. Obviously need to clean up the fumbling with Nate. He's just not putting 2 hands on the ball when he feels those defenders coming in and crashing in. That's when you got to do it. Both sides is a problem if you got it in one hand. Free toting that thing. Man, put 2 arms on that ball. That's what Oscar Delp can teach Nate Frazier a few things about that. Covers the ball really, really well. But I think you have to be so pleased with that run game for Georgia, which has been a struggle all year. You came into this game as a passing team like 60% of the time, and look how you had to end the game. Run the ball, your star passers out. You got a quarterback in there who's more of a one-read guy, has the talent to do things, just haven't had the experience. And that's a really good Texas defense, maybe the best in the country. Maybe the best. Think about that change from a passing team. Now there's potential to where you have to completely change your offense against the top teams in the country to win a national championship. Those are the questions, but silver lining, like I said, Trevor Etienne, Nate Frazier, they did some really good things. That offensive line did some really good things. Monroe Freeling at left tackle, I think, has been a big difference maker. Can't point the finger on why. I'm not an offensive line coach, but the results obviously have been better. Just absolutely impressed. And in Georgia goes from, remember that loss against Ole Miss? Georgia just gets completely physically bullied, and we're sitting there like, what? How does that even make sense, right? Just a weird season, but what a weird game. And after that game, it was fire Mike Bobo. It was fire Carson Beck. Take away his NIL. Take away his Lambo. Tow his Lambo off. And now you're sitting here, 11-2, SEC champs, automatic bye to the college football playoff, an easier trek to the college football playoff. You should be the number 2 seed, which is not a bad trek, right? The number 1 seed, that's a little shaky, and we can get into that if we want, but that'll take 30 minutes. The number 1 seed honestly looks a little shaky as far as trek. It looks like one of the harder treks in the college football playoff. The path to the national championship, that 2 seed is what Georgia should get. And depending, of course, on the Oregon game tonight, they could find themselves in that first spot. But yeah, you go from getting blown out on the road at Ole Miss a month earlier, and now you're sitting here in prime position and beating quite possibly the best team in college football. Oregon hasn't played nearly the slate Texas has, even though you can hit me with Texas has one of the easiest SEC schedules. They had to play Georgia twice. I know what Texas is. And I think they beat probably everybody else except Georgia, just because Georgia's strengths. And it's not a great matchup for Texas, we've learned. It's not a great matchup for Texas. I mean, think about that. If I'm a Texas fan, I'm just, man, you had the opportunity. A backup quarterback beat us. That's got to sting. But they're still going to be the playoff. So there's a chance that Georgia, Texas for the 3rd time. And that would be an incredible game. That would be, who knows? 3 times? I mean, when have we seen that in college football? I don't know. Ever? Has it? Be interested to know. So obviously the thing moving forward here is going to be Carson Beck, right? The status of him and his injury. Is he going to be able to maybe go in the playoff? And then also Brett Thorson. Brett Thorson goes down with a knee injury. Does not look good the way he was limping and holding that knee, trying to make a play on the punt return. Ends up going down very awkwardly, kind of blooper. Looked like a blooper. He goes out. So that obviously puts a lot of questions on Georgia in the punt game. And one of the top punters in the country. Georgia did sign the number 1 punter in the country last year, though, and Drew Miller. So, depending on how that knee looks for Brett Thorson, we might have to see some of Miller come in. And he'll be playing the games of his life if he has to, right? So that is a big deal when it comes to these, when you're playing the biggest teams, the best teams in the country. Field position is so prime. So that's another injury to look out for here. Other than that, Georgia gets by pretty unscathed. I wouldn't be surprised if Gunnar Stockton has a bit of a concussion, maybe mild. That was a massive hit he took, but he got right up, man. So pumped for him. Toughest team in the country. What team in the country has played? I know they haven't. I know Georgia has the number 1 strength of schedule. I'm not saying nobody else is. Obviously, no one else has played as tough of a slate. But who has played in games like this and come out with victories face the adversity Georgia has? No one. They're the most proven, the most proven, resilient team in the country. I can't remember as tough of a team for Georgia. You could say 2021. That's probably 1A. This has got to be 1B for me. The amount of adversity these guys have faced and the second half comebacks, man, they love to do it. They don't, but that can only help you, folks. I mean, we can look back on this season and say those 2 losses have paved the way for Georgia, and who knows, could be a national championship year, have paved the way for Georgia this season. Just knowing that you can not play at your best, but then collectively not blink, put together a string of plays, a string of elite plays on both sides of the ball, all phases, and come out with wins when no one gives you a chance. I'm saying no one. Most people didn't give you a chance going into this game. And Kirby Smart's going to probably say something along those lines. You have other people like, nah, you're the number 5 team in the country. People gave you chances. Not really. At least from the national media perspective, you didn't see much of that. You didn't see much of that. I saw Georgia pundits taking Texas. Most of the people on College Game Day taking Texas. That's how it's going to go. I'll be really interested if they do match up for the 3rd time, who's going to be taking who, right? If it comes to that point, I'm going to have to take Georgia, depending on Carson Beck in that situation. But it's just that defensive front just eats lunch. The offensive line ate lunch today against a really good defense too. It's all line of scrimmage, baby. It's run game and line of scrimmage. And you put up 31 yards rushing against Georgia today, that's not a winning formula. You could pass it. You may pass it for 358. Pass it for 358, and it doesn't matter. Run game wins championships. Run game, offensive line, defensive line, line of scrimmage wins championships. And Georgia is an SEC champion again under Kirby Smart. Kirby Smart's 3rd SEC championship at Georgia, first since 2022. And they've broken the ESPN College Game Day curse. Speaking of game day, Georgia was 0-7 all time in SEC championships when College Game Day was on site. That curse is broken. The punt curse is broken. Georgia can fake punts now. And the College Game Day curse is broken as well. Let's hit some comments. Georgie Brandon on Facebook. Wonderful win. Wonderful win. Go Dogs. Laura Driscoll. We know the feeling of losing to a backup QB. Absolutely good point, Laura. Absolutely good point. That's another curse that is broken. It's another curse that is broken. Go Dogs. Go Dogs. Beck getting hurt, unfortunately, is what seemed to fire up the team. That finish was just amazing. It did feel like that, but I don't want to put too much stock on that here. I don't think that's a wrong take. I just think that the game started to turn because Georgia was getting a lot of push on that offensive line, right? Run game started to hit. That's what I'm looking at. But I'm not taking anything away from Gunnar Stockton. That is such an incredibly hard position to be in. I can't even really imagine what he was going through. Never been in that position myself. I think you have to be in those shoes to know. But not taking anything away from him. But his supporting cast absolutely played better. And who knows? It could have been Gunnar sparking that. But, we've seen traditionally Georgia just be better in the second half too. So it's what a weird team, tough team, and SEC championship team. We'll go one more up there. The fam's getting in there. Wow. Enjoy this one, Georgia fans. Enjoy this one. A crazy, heart-wrenching season. And we still got a lot of games left. All right, so let's get this schedule for you guys because I need to relook at this for myself. So let's buffer here while we look up the college football playoff schedule. Here we go. All right. So, so first round, December 20th to the 21st. Okay. Georgia get a bye there, right? So then you've got semifinals. That's when Georgia's going to play January 9th through 10th. So that's a long time for Georgia to get it healthy. You think about guys like Branson Robinson and Roderick Robinson, adding some depth to that running back room, getting them up to speed a little bit. Branson was questionable headed into this one. You think about, more importantly, Carson Beck and Brett Thorson If those injuries are not season ending, I think it's okay to expect them to be back with a month, to get healthy. Right. And then, no, my bad, guys. Quarterfinals. I'm looking at this live just like you are. Quarterfinals on December 31st to January 1st. Okay. Now that's when Georgia's going to be playing, right? Then you play again 9th to 10th. And then, in the national championship game on the January 20th in Atlanta, too, right? So back in basically a home game for Georgia again if they make it to the national championship. And how cool would it be winning that game again in Atlanta? This state would just go crazy. Dude, I can't wait for Georgia to have an opportunity for that. That would be really awesome to cover this team with a run like this. Just absolute toughness. That's what I'm going to leave you guys with as you enjoy tonight and another SEC championship for the Bulldogs is toughness. Just absolutely tough. I don't see another team with the stones to pull off a game like that. Just my opinion. As nationally, I don't see those guys. Interested to see how Oregon plays tonight. Be watching that one closely. Could see the Ducks, of course, or Penn State, right? Not a big believer in Penn State. I think Oregon wins this game, but we'll see. We'll see. Until next time, we'll get back next week. We'll talk it through again. We'll get Arthur Lynch on here, get his thoughts, former Georgia tight end. Be back next week. But until then, guys, enjoy the win. We appreciate, as always, you sticking with us throughout the season. Every single one of you logging on and watching me just babble, or whether you're listening in podcast form, I really appreciate it. Absolutely. And the feedback we get this year has been one for the history books for us in this show. So appreciate the time as always. And we'll see you next week. We'll see you soon. Enjoy the win. Georgia Bulldogs get another SEC championship under their belts with an automatic bid to the college football playoff and a path to national championship.